facing a letter from Brando that I like even better than the Oscar.
What did Brando say in the letter?
I'm not going to tell you.
Calm, disciplined.
95. Over nearly 7 decades, he built a body of work that few actors of his generation could match. Tom Hagen in The Godfather, Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore in Apocalypse Now, Max Sledge in Tender Mercies, Gus McCrae in Lonesome Dove. He won an Oscar, was nominated for 6 more, and worked until he was well past 90. He was also, by his own admission, and by the testimony of nearly everyone who worked with him, a stubborn man. Not cruel, not vengeful. Stubborn, the kind of actor who would fight for a take, walk away from a paycheck he thought was unfair, and tell a director to his face that he was wrong. That's a very different story than hatred. But it's a real one, and it's better than the fake one. Here are 6 people Robert Duvall genuinely clashed with, argued with, or bluntly criticized, on the record, in his own words and theirs. If there's one relationship that actually produced a lasting rift, it's this one. Though even here, hatred overstates it. Call it a betrayal Duvall never fully let go of. Coppola cast Duvall as Tom Hagen in 1972's The Godfather, and the role made him a star. He got $36,000 for the original film, reportedly $1,000 more than Al Pacino at the time, and $500,000 for the 1974 sequel after an Oscar nomination raised his stock. For 2 films, Duvall was Coppola's quiet backbone, the consigliere, the guy who kept the family's business out of the papers. Then came The Godfather Part 3. By the late 1980s, when Coppola began developing the 3rd film, Paramount offered Pacino roughly $5 million. Some reports put the final figure closer to $8 million once profit points were included, to return as Michael Corleone. Duvall was offered $1 million. Duvall didn't ask for parity. He asked for proportion. In a 2004 interview on 60 Minutes, he explained it plainly. I said I would work easily if they paid Pacino twice what they paid me. That's fine. But not 3 or 4 times, which is what they did. When negotiations stalled, Coppola flew to Duvall's Virginia farm to make his case in person. Duvall cooked him his mother's crab cake recipe. According to Duvall, Coppola left without a deal, and then called back twice, more interested in getting the recipe than in resolving the contract. It's a funny story, but the outcome wasn't. Tom Hagen was written out of Part 3 entirely, replaced by a different lawyer character played by George Hamilton. Duvall later told Parade magazine the producers were simply cheap, adding, "There are 2 or 3 other actors in that film being paid more than I was offered. That just isn't right." He said he had no regrets about walking away. It was a matter of principle, not money for its own sake. Reality check. This wasn't personal hatred of Coppola as a filmmaker. Duvall spoke warmly about their earlier collaborations for the rest of his life, calling the experience of making the first 2 Godfather films great, great, great. What it produced was a permanent professional break. Tom Hagen never returned to the saga, over what Duvall genuinely believed was disrespect dressed up as a budget line. The same pay dispute that ended Duvall's relationship with Coppola also cost him his on-screen partnership with Al Pacino. But the real story here undercuts the feud framing almost entirely. Duvall and Pacino were never rivals. They were castmates who came up through the same era of serious, stage-trained New York actors. And by all accounts, they respected each other deeply. There's no record of them rooming together. That story belongs to Duvall, Dustin Hoffman, and Gene Hackman, not Pacino, but they share the screen across 2 of the greatest films ever made, with Duvall steady, restrained Tom Hagen serving as the counterweight to Pacino's increasingly ruthless Michael Corleone. What actually happened is a money dispute, not a betrayal. Pacino was offered several times what Duvall was offered for Part 3, and Duvall found that gap, not Pacino's success itself, impossible to accept. There's no public record of Pacino weighing in against Duvall during the standoff, or of Duvall blaming Pacino personally. The anger in every interview Duvall gave was aimed at Paramount and Coppola's budget decisions, not at his old co-star. When Duvall died in February 2026, Pacino was one of the first people to speak. He and Robert De Niro both released statements mourning their former co-star. Hardly the language of a lingering feud. Whatever tension existed in the late 1980s over a contract had clearly cooled into something closer to old guard respect by the time either man reached the end of his career. Reality check. If this is a feud, it's one that existed almost entirely on paper, in a studio's budget spreadsheet, rather than between the two men themselves. This one is real friction, but it runs in an unexpected direction. Admiration curdled by professional frustration, not the other way around. Duvall came up idolizing Brando. In interviews around The Godfather's 50th anniversary, he described Brando as something like a patron saint to young actors of his generation, the man whose work in On the Waterfront and A Streetcar named Desire actors of Duvall's era treated almost as scripture. He recalled Coppola staging formal in-character dinners with the cast early in production specifically so the young actors could absorb some of Brando's presence. But working alongside him complicated the myth. Brando famously refused to memorize his lines in full, relying instead on cue cards taped around the set, a habit that became one of Hollywood's most enduring pieces of trivia. For decades, people speculated about why. Speaking to the AV Club for The Godfather's anniversary, Duvall finally addressed it directly, suggesting the explanation was only partly about Brando's famous acting theories, and partly, in Duvall's blunt assessment, simple laziness. That's a genuinely pointed thing for a co-star to say about a legend, and it reflects something real about how Duvall saw the difference between his own disciplined, prep-heavy process. He learned dialect, played in country bands, and embedded with real detectives and mobsters to prepare for roles, and Brando's more improvisational, cue card-assisted style. Reality check. Even while making that criticism, Duvall never disowned his admiration for Brando's talent. This wasn't hatred. It was one meticulous craftsman being honest about a colleague's shortcuts, decades after the fact, with nothing to gain or lose from saying it. Here's a genuine, well-documented on-set clash, and it involved fists, or at least the threat of them. In 1969, on the set of True Grit, a 38-year-old Duvall, not yet the star he'd become, was cast as the outlaw Ned Pepper opposite John Wayne's Rooster Cogburn. Wayne had fought hard for the role, and had a clear old Hollywood idea of how his film should be made. Duvall, trained under Sanford Meisner and already known among his peers for a volatile temper, had his own ideas about the character and clashed repeatedly with both Wayne and director Henry Hathaway over how scenes should play. According to reporting on the production, tensions escalated to the point that Wayne, a man not known for backing down, reportedly threatened to punch Duvall over the disagreements. It didn't happen, and the film went on to win Wayne his only competitive Oscar. But the friction was real, rooted in something that would define Duvall's whole career. He pushed back on directors and co-stars when he thought a scene wasn't being played honestly, regardless of who he was pushing back against. Reality check. This was a clash of two very different acting philosophies. Old-school Hollywood command versus a younger, method-adjacent actor unwilling to simply defer. It cooled once filming ended. There's no record of ongoing hostility between them afterward. This is the best documented, most recent account we have, because Beresford spoke about it publicly in the days after Duvall's death in 2026. Beresford directed Duvall in 1983's Tender Mercies, the film that finally earned Duvall his only competitive Oscar for playing a washed-up alcoholic country singer. It's remembered today as one of the great American character performances. It was not, by Beresford's account, an easy shoot. Beresford liked to plan scenes meticulously in advance, camera angles, blocking, line readings. Duvall pushed back constantly, favoring a looser, more instinctive approach built on the research he'd done driving more than 600 miles around Texas, recording accents and playing in country bands to prepare. Their disagreements were serious enough that Beresford, according to reporting on the production, at one point walked off the set and reportedly considered leaving the film entirely. Speaking to The Hollywood Reporter shortly after Duvall's death, Beresford didn't sand down the memory. Asked directly, he described his star as surly, recalling how he'd plan a scene meticulously only for Duvall to look at the setup and mutter, "Oh, is that it?" In a 1985 biography, Duvall was equally candid about the friction, saying Beresford had this dictatorial way of doing things with me that just doesn't cut it. The two men never worked together again, and by Beresford's own account, never crossed paths again after the production wrapped, not even at the Oscars ceremony where Duvall won. Reality check. Beresford paired every hard word with genuine praise. He described watching Duvall's first scene and feeling the skin crawl on the back of his neck, calling the performance absolutely great, and noted that no matter how much Duvall resisted direction, it always looked better than I imagined it would. This is a portrait of two strong-willed professionals who respected each other's results, while never quite getting along personally. Not a grudge, and not hate. The most surprising entry on this list isn't a co-star from a famous film. It's an old roommate. In the 1950s, a young Duvall shared a New York apartment with Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman, all three of them broke, ambitious, and training under Sanford Meisner. By most accounts, it was a formative, even joyful period. The three future legends played pranks on each other and shared the particular camaraderie of struggling actors with nothing to lose. But Duvall and Hackman also shared something else: short fuses. Reporting on their years as roommates describes both men as quick-tempered, prone to bar fights, each channeling a real edge of anger into their work. Hoffman later recalled that Duvall would sometimes pick an audience member he professed to despise and shout an expletive at them after a curtain call, using genuine emotion as fuel. Asked about Hackman decades later, in a 2013 interview with Vanity Fair, Duvall's own description of his old roommate was pointed rather than warm. He called Hackman a tormented guy, someone who stayed always into his own space, his own thing. It's not an insult exactly, but from a man not given to unnecessary commentary about his peers. It reads as a real assessment of distance, not affection. Reality check. There's no record of a rupture or falling out between them. Just two intense young actors who lived on top of each other, occasionally came to blows with strangers, and grew into very different men. When Hackman died in February 2025, less than a year before Duvall himself, there was no public statement of estrangement, just a quiet fact of two old friends from a shared, difficult beginning. Line them up: Coppola, Pacino, Brando, Wayne, Beresford, Hackman, and the hatred framing falls apart on contact. What's actually there is more interesting: a man who prepared obsessively, who believed a role wasn't earned unless you'd sweated for it, and who had almost no patience for anyone, director, legend, or old friend, who he thought was cutting a corner or lowballing him. He said as much himself more than once, without needing a villain to say it about. Robert Duvall didn't need enemies to be difficult. He managed that on principle alone. Rest in peace, Bob.